All right, building humongous, powerful natty delts in DOS years. How did I do it? So you can see on the left here, this is me 2 years ago. Smaller in every way, but especially in my delts. My delts were just pathetic for years. I thought they were a genetic weak spot. They very well might be. But in the last 2 years, I've been able to grow vastly bigger and stronger natural delts. There is a misconception that natties can't get big delts because you don't have the hormone profile to attach to the androgen receptors that are in your shoulders and traps, and thus the only way to get the 3D popping, bulging delts is to be on steroids. I think this is nonsense. I think with a few different things considered, natties can get big delts. You just have to change a few parameters, a few sneaky things that you might not be considering to get big fuck off delts. So what is the solution? Well, let's get into it. So first, the overarching solution is obvious. It's been high intensity training. If you know anything about my channel, I'm into high intensity training. That's how I've built a shit ton of muscle and strength in the last 2 years. Vast amount of that has been throughout a weight cut, going absolutely against the grain in the sense that most of the time, especially as an natty, you're not considered to be, or you're not supposed to gain any strength or muscle through a weight cut. With high intensity, my recovery was on point, and thus I did, especially in the delts. So high intensity training numero uno, but there's plenty of facets that tie into this that go into why my shoulders specifically have grown so much. First one is I used to do volume training a hell of a lot for delts, as a lot of people do, and I would do stupid shit like spamming side lateral raises under the assumption that more was better, doing 3 or 4 sets of side lateral raises with no real strength or progressive overload in mind on a daily basis, just to try and get a good pump and think that's going to give me huge delts. Or I would train my front delt 2 to 3 times a week with direct stimulus through overhead pressing and then indirect stimulus through other presses. So the problem there was when you do dumbbell presses, barbell presses, bench presses, chest variations, you're indirectly or almost directly hitting the front delt, as it is the second muscle in the kinetic chain of said movement, or is secondary secondary muscle responsible for joint action. So when you do bench presses and incline dumbbell presses and flies and shit, your front delt is getting trained plenty. Then you're also directly hitting it with overhead presses and other pressing variations. At the end of the week, you're training your front delt like 4 or 5 times a week sometimes with these high volume programs. And then not to mention with side delts and rear delts, when you're doing pulling movements like rows or pull downs, you're oftentimes indirectly training the side and rear delts. So you never give your shoulders enough time to recover. And as a natural, that is incredibly important. You don't have the anabolics to give you that extra recovery. Hence why so many naturals have small delts. They just overdo it with all the volume. So that was numero uno, was just simply overtraining. I was stuck at 60 kilos overhead press for like 5 years. I got that initial linear progression out of the way when I was a novice, 30 kilos to like 60 kilos in like 6 to 10 months. And then I was stuck in like the intermediate stage for like 3 or 4 years. It wasn't until I switched to high intensity, 1 set once a week, to absolute failure did I actually start then progressing. Nowadays, I'm doing 90 kilos for reps. That's a 30 kilo increase in about 2 years through high intensity training. And again, that has been mostly in a weight cut. So simply giving myself time to rest and just making it far more simplistic has allowed me to massively strengthen my overhead press strength. The overhead press is incredibly important, especially for a natty. You need to be strong, raw strength, not neurological adaptive strength, but raw strength will equate to bigger muscles, especially big compound movements like the overhead press. If you get a strong overhead press, it's very unlikely that you're going to have small delts. And you can't get a strong overhead press if you can't progress it because you're overtrained, because you're doing all this indirect and direct volume work. So one of the biggest arguments against high intensity training is you don't get strong. But at the end of the day, I've gained personally far more strength with high intensity through the simplicity and over recovery of sorts from just doing it once a week. Whereas for years, again with volume, no matter what I did, I just simply couldn't get the strength up. I was overtrained. Next is a more of a micro point, a bit unrelated to high intensity, albeit it actually is related. But firstly is seated over standing variation. So standing overhead press isn't a inherently, bad movement, but the problem is there is far more of a technical aspect to it and far more of a neurological aspect to it. You are going to have to use far more of your resources to stabilize and make sure that your abs are tight, make sure you have to compartmentalize standardization by not pushing through your heels or using your lower back to move the weight up, and then all of a sudden you're falsely regressing or progressing depending on if you're cheating too much or if you're mis-repping something because there's so much of a technical aspect you can start misgrooving reps. Whereas with the seated overhead press variation, it's purely hypertrophy and raw strength. There's no real technique involved. I mean, there is mildly some technique, but you're not stabilizing your core. It's very hard to cheat a seated overhead press, and thus it is much better for just pure hypertrophy and raw strength. So that's more of a micro point. But also, with seated overhead press, it's easier to take to failure, because when you're standing, failure can oftentimes be dangerous. The core might give out before your shoulders do. You might pass out before your shoulders do, in which case you don't have safety pins because you had to unrack it from the rack. Whereas with seated overhead presses, you can take them to absolute failure, and if you fail, you just simply rack it down on the safety pins. Also, it is much easier for a spotter to give you force reps on seated overhead presses, whereas if you're standing, unless you have a 9-foot tall space marine behind you, there's no real way anyone can spot you. So it's vastly better for training beyond failure, it is better for training to failure safely, and it is better for training your delts more effectively. Next is useless side lateral raises. So don't get me wrong, I don't mean that side lateral raises are useless. I'm saying people are doing side lateral raises wrong, including myself. For years, I would spam side laterals with a bunch of volume, frequency, and volume, rather than just giving it the intensity it needed, the standardization of form it needed, and the progressive overload it needed. A lot of people don't focus progressive overload on their side lateral raises or many isolation exercises. But at the end of the day, it's a movement and it's muscles like any other muscle or movement in the body, like a bench press, squat, deadlift, etc. You progressively overload those, intrinsically understanding that progressive overload is needed, but we don't focus side lateral raises progressive overload nearly as much. So I used to just up the sets, more and more sets, more and more reps, and more and more cheat form and all this nonsense, rather than just giving it a actually good stimulus, a good hard effort to mechanical failure once a week, and then leave it. It seems massively counterintuitive with side lateral raises. It feels like one of these exercises where you can do them so often because it's so easy to recover from. It's so, benign or such a small recovery aspect, but it ties into the indirect stimulus that you get from rows, pull downs, etc. My side delts have grown vastly more from just simply doing one set with maybe a drop set here and there once a week. At first, I thought there's no fucking way this is gonna work, but I stuck to it, and all of a sudden, my side delts grew massively. And the side delts is so important, hence why side laterals are so important. Make sure that you're training them with strict form, and then when you fail with strict form, you can do a bit of cheating to go beyond failure, and make sure that you're progressively overloading, albeit slowly because it's a small muscle. It's a small muscle, but it's directly responsible for your V-taper. The lats are also important, but at the end of the day, the biggest width comes from your shoulders and the smallest width comes from your waist. And even half a centimeter to your side delt can make all the difference to your physique in the world. So make sure that you're training side lateral raises, but do them correctly. Do them once a week with a shit ton of effort and progressively overload them slowly, and your side delts will fucking blow up. Next is actual intensity of effort. So again, tying into everything I've been saying, rather than doing reps in reserve and ultimately doing too much volume, which is putting more strain on my central nervous system, tendons, ligaments, etc. This way, I do it once a week and I just put every ounce of my energy into that one set, give my muscle an actual reason to adapt, rather than giving my muscles, 5 reasons not to adapt through 5 sets of 10 reps in reserve. I just give myself one absolute balls to the wall set, and I actually have now a reason to adapt. So make sure the intensity of effort is there. Push that overhead press, side lateral raise, and rear delt variation to absolute mechanical failure, even then some beyond, and you'll see gains. Your shoulders will have an actual reason to adapt through size and strength. It isn't just the overtraining aspect. It's partially because I didn't have enough stimulus there to grow. It's the oxymoron of I'm overtrained because I'm doing too much volume that's not actually making any adaptation, versus the training that is harder but allows me to recover. Next is get lean enough. This is an underrated point. Now, the first picture you saw of me flexing with the smaller shoulders, I wasn't tremendously overweight. I was probably 15, 16% body fat. Whereas in the photo you saw me flexing before, I was more like 16, 17. So by all means, getting the size is very important, but at the same time, much previously, I would do powerlifting and I was like 25, 35% body fat, like just not 35, 30% body fat, just fucking fat, man. And good luck seeing any definition in just about any muscles, especially the shoulders where the cap comes from the roundness that attaches to the arm attachment. If that's not there because it's like just a wall of fat there, you're not going to see that little indent that gives you the roundness. So you need to make sure that you're lean enough. As a natural, you want to be anywhere between 10% body fat as high as 20%. Anything over 20%, you'll simply be too fat to see any real definition at all, any striation or any real 3Dness. Too lean and your testosterone will drop and your cytoplasm reticulum density will drop because you won't be consuming enough carbs. Without anabolics, that shit will just deflate like any other muscle too. So be lean enough, don't be too lean, don't be too fat. The last point is KISS, or keep it stupid simple equals progress. So at the end of the day, high intensity training is just simplicity in its finest, which allows for no real neurotic changes or any crazy parameter that will make it very difficult to adhere to the training or make you constantly program hop. Just realized my webcam's been in the way of these fucking points. Oh well. KISS will keep it much more simple, and that way you'll be able to adhere to it and it will make everything much easier to just simply progress up slowly but surely, rather than all this overwhelming amount of data from scientists and oh, you need 52 sets or 30 sets, or you need 15 different variations of overhead press to overrule the biological law of accommodation. All this shit that used to just overwhelm me and made me quit the overhead press because it ultimately didn't mean anything and I'd be constantly changing parameters and never get any progression. It's all marketing nonsense. You need to have intensity, recovery, and yeah, maybe some calories, but albeit I gained plenty of strength and size to my delts without calorie intake. So that's the last point, is if you keep it simple, your delts will grow. Onto the conclusion. So the conclusion, I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but I want this to ingrain into your mind. Once a week, easy and recovered. So simple, just once a week, hard as fuck, it'll be so easy to do and you'll be recovered. Next is fatties will not see their delts. If you're too fat, you ain't gonna see your delts, and weaklings will not see their delts either. You have to gain some strength. If you're too overtrained to get strength, you simply won't get big, natty delts. So hopefully that video has been informative. I invite you over the next 6 months, say, if you are a volume guy and you still want to do volume and everything else because you're scared you'll lose all your strength and gains from just doing once a week high intensity, I invite you, however, to simply just change your shoulder day or your push day so that you only do shoulders once a week with one set to absolute failure. Try that for 6 months and you'll see some gains, because as the great Dorian Yates says, it's not magic. If you haven't seen gains from this month or the month before or the last, 6 months, what do you think's going to happen over the next month or two? You're going to see gains? You're going to see some progressive overload or size gains? No. You're not going to have a genie come out of a fucking bottle and all of a sudden he's like, yo, no, you know what? This guy's been training hard with this volume shit. It hasn't been working for him, but let's make it work. No, it's not going to work if it's not working already. So you're going to have to change something. Try it out. Just do overhead presses for one set to balls to the wall failure every 7 days, and do a set of side lateral raises, balls to the wall failure once every 7 days. If you need to psychologically feel more stimulus, you can do a drop set, some force reps, what have you, but make it one set. And I guarantee you over the next 6 months, you're going to see more shoulder gains than you've seen in a very, very long time. Until next time, anyway, bye.